You keep saying Meghan Markle, you know I'm Sussex now. You have kids and you go, no, I share my name with my children.
Yes.
And that feels so, I didn't know how meaningful it would be to me, but it just means so much to go.
President Trump also announced a new trade deal with the UK that will reopen British markets for American companies. All that Britain demands in return is that we keep these two.
The lights dimmed on Studio 8H, the crowd settled into their seats, and nobody, absolutely nobody, could have predicted that what happened next would obliterate years of carefully crafted royal PR in under 60 seconds. On that fateful Saturday night, Colin Jost didn't just deliver a punchline, he delivered a cultural death blow that would send shockwaves across continents and mark the definitive end of America's love affair with the Sussex fairy tale. What unfolded wasn't just comedy, it was a public execution broadcast to millions, and the victim never saw it coming. Colin Jost stepped up to the Weekend Update desk with his trademark smirk, but this time, there was something different in his eyes, something sharper, something that spelled trouble for Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. The audience had no idea they were about to witness television history, the moment when even Saturday Night Live, that bastion of progressive comedy, would finally turn its back on the Sussex brand.
Yet. My business hasn't gotten traction. Yet. No one's picked up my book proposal. Yet.
Yes.
I haven't found my soulmate. Yet. Everything is yet.
The power of yet.
Could it be a mystery for the ages? They're ridiculous. After
the setup was deceptively simple. Jost began weaving a fictional narrative about President Trump's new trade deal with the UK, building tension with each word. The crowd leaned in, sensing something big was coming. Then he delivered the kill shot. The deal's condition was that Britain would take back these two, and the camera panned to images of Harry and Meghan. But then came the line that would echo around the world, calling Prince Harry an unemployed immigrant in LA whose family won't talk to him. The studio erupted. Not polite chuckles, not nervous, laughter, thunderous, cathartic applause that seemed to go on forever. In that moment, Jost had articulated what millions of Americans had been thinking but were afraid to say out loud.
Now, the Sussexes have copped it from comedian Colin Jost on Saturday Night Live. He's joked that one of the conditions of Trump's new trade deal with the UK is that Harry and Meghan have to go back. It's pretty cruel, Kinsey.
Look, there's no way President Trump would agree and says he feels sorry for Prince Harry because his wife is a lot to deal with. Trump says he hates the way that Harry dealt with the late Queen, and judging by his friendliness towards King Charles, he won't appreciate the way Harry continues to run his mouth against the monarchy today. And say what you want about the Trump dynasty, but they are in.
Within minutes of Jost's brutal assessment hitting the airwaves, something unprecedented happened. The clip didn't just go viral. It became a cultural phenomenon that spread faster than wildfire across every major social media platform. Twitter users were retweeting it with crying, laughing emojis. TikTok creators were already remixing the audio over footage from the couple's Netflix series. Instagram meme pages were having a field day, comparing Harry to a bored house husband waiting in a Whole Foods parking lot. The numbers were staggering. Within the first hour, the clip had garnered over 2 million views across platforms. By morning, it was the #1 trending topic on Twitter, with hashtags like unemployed immigrant and SNL roast dominating feeds worldwide. Celebrity accounts were sharing it. News outlets were picking it up. Even international media were translating and republishing the devastating punchlines. But then the real impact became clear. This wasn't just trending because it was controversial, it was resonating because it felt undeniably true.
Meghan, she's been threatened with a $10 million lawsuit after a woman suffered catastrophic burns allegedly from the Duchess's do-it-yourself bath salt recipe. This is a recipe that Kinsey featured on her Netflix show. What else?
No pun intended, have legs. Attorney Christopher Melcher, who's based in Hollywood here, told me that Netflix could have and probably should have put a disclaimer on the screen to save their own skin, saying, consult a doctor or seek medical advice if you're looking for something specific. Now, the Meghan fan, this is crazy, said she's
years of softball journalism and carefully managed PR campaigns couldn't compete with 60 seconds of brutal honesty that cut straight to the heart of public frustration with the Sussex brand. What made this moment truly seismic wasn't just the laughter, it was the source. Saturday Night Live has always been considered a safe space for progressive figures like Meghan Markle. This is the same show that had spent years years lampooning conservative targets while treating liberal darlings with kid gloves. For decades, SNL had been the cultural thermometer of left-leaning America, and progressive figures could count on protection from its writers and performers. But not anymore. When Colin Jost delivered that devastating assessment of the Sussexes, he wasn't being rebellious or edgy, he was being honest. And that honesty reflected a massive shift in public sentiment that even progressive institutions could no longer ignore.
Be reached feels like a little bit of a shakedown, but if her demands are not met, she intends to launch a lawsuit seeking settlement damages of a minimum of $75,000 to cover medical expenses.
This is going to be fascinating.
The protective bubble that had surrounded Meghan and Harry was finally bursting, and even their supposed allies were stepping back. The irony was palpable. This wasn't a takedown from Fox News or some right-wing podcast. This was coming from the heart of liberal entertainment, from a platform that had historically embraced everything Meghan claimed to represent. When even Saturday Night Live turns on you, it's not just comedy, it's a cultural verdict. But then came the real shock, the deafening silence from Meghan's usual defenders. Where were the think pieces from Vox? Where were the outraged tweets from progressive celebrities? Where was the army of supporters who had previously rushed to defend every criticism of the Duchess? Their absence spoke volumes about how dramatically the narrative had shifted. Jost's surgical precision didn't stop at the unemployed immigrant joke. He systematically dismantled every aspect of the Sussex brand, paying particular attention to Meghan's disastrous podcast venture, Confessions of a Female Founder. What was supposed to be a raw, unfiltered look at female entrepreneurship had instead become a masterclass in everything wrong with celebrity activism. Industry insiders had been whispering about the podcast's problems for months. Sources described it as painfully scripted, completely disconnected from reality, and more focused on Meghan's personal brand than actual entrepreneurship. Instead of bold revelations about the challenges of building a business, viewers got softball questions, corporate buzzwords, and shallow monologues wrapped in faux feminist jargon. The podcast flopped so spectacularly that Netflix quietly pulled back promotional resources. Apple charts showed it falling like a stone, unable to maintain even modest listenership numbers. Unlike Harry's Invictus Games, which at least served a legitimate charitable cause, Confessions felt like nothing more than an ego project masquerading as empowerment. But then Jost delivered the killing blow, turning Meghan's founder status into a punchline that exposed the whole venture for what it really was, a PR stunt cloaked in self-importance. He skewered the phoniness without hesitation, revealing how every time Meghan reappeared in public, it was tied to some product launch or media rollout. Her so-called activism had become indistinguishable from advertising. As if the podcast disaster wasn't damaging enough, Jost's timing coincided with an even more damaging revelation. Reports were surfacing about a potential $10 million lawsuit against Meghan after a woman allegedly suffered catastrophic burns from following the Duchess's do-it-yourself bath salt recipe featured on her Netflix show. Legal experts were having a field day with the implications. Attorney Christopher Melcher pointed out that Netflix probably should have included medical disclaimers to protect itself from exactly this kind of liability. The fact that they didn't suggest either incompetence or arrogance, neither of which reflected well on Meghan's supposed business acumen. The victim was reportedly demanding $75,000 just to cover medical expenses, with threats of pursuing much larger settlement damages if her demands weren't met. More victims were apparently coming forward with their own stories, creating a potential avalanche of legal problems that could dwarf any previous Sussex controversies. But then the real damage became apparent. This wasn't just about one lawsuit, it was about the pattern it revealed. Here was Meghan positioning herself as a lifestyle guru and wellness expert, potentially causing actual physical harm to people who trusted her advice. The juxtaposition with her carefully curated image of empowerment and care was devastating. Behind the polished Instagram filters and carefully staged public appearances, a darker truth was emerging about Meghan's standing in Hollywood. Industry insiders were quietly confirming what Jost's monologue had made public. Meghan Markle had gone from A-list curiosity to C-list cautionary tale. The doors that had once opened so readily were now firmly closed. Sources close to major studios and streaming platforms painted a picture of an industry that had grown tired of the Sussex drama. Meghan's $20 million Spotify deal had been canceled due to what insiders diplomatically called a lack of content and creativity. Netflix had scaled back its promotional support. Even Disney, which had initially courted her, was keeping its distance. The entertainment capital that built its reputation on reinvention was finding that Meghan's inability to evolve had made her toxic. She was high maintenance, overexposed, and prone to controversies that didn't convert to ratings or revenue. In an industry where relevance is everything, Meghan was becoming irrelevant. But then came the most damning assessment of all. Even her so-called feminist crusade now felt corporate and inauthentic. Hollywood insiders, who had initially been intrigued by her royal connections and progressive messaging, were now describing her as someone more interested in monetizing empowerment than actually empowering anyone. What started as a comedic jab on American television quickly ballooned into a worldwide phenomenon that transformed Meghan from global icon to international punchline. British tabloids gleefully replayed Jost's roast with headlines that pulled no punches. European outlets translated and republished the most devastating lines. Australian broadcasters debated whether Meghan's feminist founder branding had become a global joke. The shift was seismic and undeniable. For years, the couple had successfully capitalized on public sympathy, positioning themselves as victims of racism, press intrusion, and royal rigidity. But sympathy requires authenticity, and Jost's roast had crystallized a growing global belief that the Sussexes were no longer authentic figures. They were manufactured personas whose narratives shifted depending on what would sell. Even more striking was how Meghan, once positioned as a global icon of empowerment, was now being mocked across continents. No longer shielded by royal status or media adoration, she'd become a caricature in the global consciousness, a cautionary tale about celebrity excess rather than a role model for aspiration. But then the international coverage revealed something even more devastating: the complete absence of defenders. When global media turns you into comedy material and nobody rushes to your defense, it's not just bad PR, it's brand death. In the immediate aftermath of Jost's viral moment, reports began surfacing about panic behind the scenes in Meghan's camp. Sources described frantic calls to media outlets, desperate emails to social media platforms, and even veiled requests to tone down coverage of the SNL segment. The response reeked of desperation and only made the situation worse. Insiders suggested that Meghan was absolutely livid about being humiliated on national television and deeply embarrassed by the unemployed immigrant characterization of Harry. But their defensive posturing only fanned the flames. The more they tried to suppress the clip, the more viral it became. Jost's punchlines were being clipped, memed, and remixed by millions of users who saw the attempted damage control as proof that the jokes had hit their target. This failure of crisis management spoke to a larger truth. The Sussexes had completely run out of effective strategies. Once darlings of media spin who could count on sympathetic coverage from major outlets, they now seemed utterly unprepared to handle sustained mockery. The very institutions they had once relied on for protection were no longer willing to shield their brand from satirical attack. But then came the most damaging revelation of all. The leaked details about Meghan's reactions suggested someone completely out of touch with how public perception had shifted. While she was reportedly fuming about the comedy treatment, the American public was laughing harder than they had in years. Colin Jost's Saturday Night Live takedown represented far more than a few minutes of television comedy. It marked a decisive cultural shift that transformed years of carefully managed PR into a laughingstock that spanned continents. When Saturday Night Live, long considered the final arbiter of pop culture relevance, declares your narrative dead, there's no coming back from that verdict. The thunderous applause that greeted Jost's assessment wasn't cruel, it was overdue. It crystallized what millions had been thinking but hadn't dared voice: that Meghan's carefully curated image was hollow, her activism performative, and her ambitions transparently self-serving. The protective bubble of privilege, PR spin, and performative activism that had once shielded her had finally burst completely. Perhaps most devastating of all was the silence that followed. No Hollywood allies rushed to her defense. No progressive media outlets penned supportive think pieces. No celebrity friends posted supportive social media messages. The absence of defenders spoke louder than any criticism could have, revealing just how completely the tide of public opinion had turned. But then came the final, crushing realization. This wasn't just about one bad night of comedy. This was about the complete collapse of a brand that had overpromised and underdelivered on every front. Meghan Markle's SNL moment will be remembered not just as a roast, but as the cultural full stop to a narrative that had exhausted American patience and goodwill. The fairy tale was officially over, and America wasn't just moving on. It was laughing as it walked away.